In this video, I'm going to be talking about some of the most basic aspects of programming, and we're going to be using the Coral language for that. And we are other videos will build on this, but I thought it was important to start with the absolute most basic things first. You know, programming can be very hard, and it's usually hard for a couple of reasons. The things that trip up those who are learning programming. Number one, what we call sequencing. And sequencing means knowing how to outline step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, so that your program does what it needs to do. And then the second that can be really difficult is logic. And, logic, we'll get into logic a little bit more, but programming is really made up of these two things at its most basic level: sequencing and logic. And so I want to go through a few real basics to get you started. So one of the ways that I like to deal with sequencing, or help students with sequencing, is to think about what it is you're trying to accomplish. So let's say that we have we want to simply print or show, let's say, show hello world on 2 lines. So I wrote it out like this because I think it makes a big difference if you put it down. When a programmer, like, who works for a business or is contracted to do some work, they start with a set of requirements. And requirements essentially is, what do I want? What problem am I trying to solve by this program? The requirements for simple things like hello world are, sometimes it's hard to translate that and see that as a requirement. But so the first thing, that once you've identified and understand what the requirements are, then the next thing that I like to do, and I suggest to students to do, is to just write out in English form what you want, how you want to, the steps you think are that you want to take to meet the requirements. So I in Corel, by the way, these little slashes just mean that this is a comment, and when the program interprets the code, it just skips over these. So they're not really part of the program. They're just here. So I'm going to just say display hello, and then I'm going to put new line space world, like this. So this is just we sometimes might refer to this as pseudocode, but it's just an English way of telling me, okay, this is how I want to approach this program. So then I'm actually going to write the program now. So step 1, understand what the requirements are. Step 2, write them out in English steps so that you don't have to worry about the syntax or anything like that. You don't have to use the right keywords that are part of a programming language. And then the third step is, okay, now let's start writing the program. So in Coral, there's something called put, which essentially just means to display. And I'm going to just copy this, and put it here like this. Now, there's a thing in most languages, really, it's an escape character, which is a slash and an N, which is essentially a new line. And then to complete the line here, we would say to output. This is the way the syntax works in Coral. Now, if I execute this and run it, it will print it out. Notice how it printed it out as on 2 lines. That's because this guy right here, these 2 characters together make a new line. If you're just with Coral specifically, if I wanted to just put this in 2, if I did this like this, and I did this, and I run it, it doesn't automatically put that line space in even when they're on separate lines. Notice how it just blended it all together. That's why it's important that you put the new line in if you want to drop to another line. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second is just about every program that you write is going to have what we call variables. And essentially what a variable is, if you go to the post office, you see these a whole wall full of post office boxes. And if you kind of look at them closely, you'll see that there are small ones that maybe only hold some letters. And then, maybe you're a company, a business, and you need a post office box that's bigger. So you rent one that's larger, that holds packages in it. So they come in all shapes and sizes, and variables are like that too. They come in different sizes, and they hold different types of stuff. So Corel is a very simple language, and for Corel, you only have two. You have one that's called an integer, and you have one that's called a float. And anytime that you use a variable, you first have to declare it. This is true of almost every programming language. And it's kind of like, you have to go to the post office, you have to go and pay the rent, and they give you a number for your post office box. So you're kind of doing the same thing here. And when you're declaring it, you also then just give the variable a name. So again, there's two different kinds in Corel. There's an integer and there's a float. So Corel, very simple, it only stores numbers. An integer is a number that doesn't have a decimal point. A float is a number that does have a decimal point. So I need to name what my variable is. I'm just going to call it number here. And then later in my program, I can do something with it like this, number equals 10. And so what I'm doing here now is I've set up the mailbox and I've put a letter in it. I put a number, in this case, of 10. And then at some point down the road, I can actually pull that value out like this. So right here, notice it's the same as this, it's the same as this. What it's going to do is it's going to output or display the value that's in number. So it won't say the word number, it will say 10. So let's go through and just execute this very simple program. So notice first it set up a variable here and we put a 10 in it. And then it output that 10 as, it output number as what the value of it was. Okay, moving on. So by the way, I could just do exactly the same thing with a float. And then I can even do, instead of having a variable number right here, I could do something like this, number times. So, we don't use an X for a times in programming, we use an asterisk, other number. And it will actually do this calculation, number times other number, and it will put it in here and then it'll display it. So let's see what happens. So got these two set up, let's run it. We're putting 10 in the one and 50.5 in the other, and then it's doing the calculation and it's displaying it as output down here. Okay, and I can do any kind of calculations that I want. Let's say I have another variable here, and I can say results equals 100 times number plus other number. Whatever kind of calculation I want to perform, I can perform in there. And then I can display results right here. And let's run it one more time. And it displays the results. Okay, so we'll simplify this. So with the labs that are part of the course, these labs always will, rather than setting a value for number like this, we will be pulling the value of number from this little input box. So instead of an assignment like this that assigns 10 to the variable number, we use something else, get next input. And if I had more than one thing, I would put 20, 30 with a space between them. That's just the way Corel works. So this will pull that number in as the program runs, and then we can display it. So if I run this again with 10 in here, notice the variable picked up that 10, and then we output the 10. It's important. The reason why the labs do this is they're actually they'll give you, the lab will say, use this output, 10, 20, 30, but then it will actually run your program 2 or 3 other times and use other input and be looking for other outputs or results. And it does this to make sure that you're not just kind of, I don't want to say cheating, but skipping the part where you're really learning how the lab should work. So this is going to be really common if you want to have, like, let's say we want number 2 like this. Let's do this. And so we would get number 1. Got to type right. So if I have 20 here, and then we'll do this, equals number 1 plus number 2. And we'll display the result. So if we go this way, we'll see that it's populating these by pulling them out of the input, calculates result, and then displays it. Now, you can, you'll find an error if you did something like this. If I have 3 variables here, and I get, oops, let me try that again. And I was to do something like this, so I'm getting next input 3 times, but I only have 2 outputs or inputs here. Then as I run this, it's going to work fine for a minute, but then it's going to give me this error because it tried to come out here to the input box to get the third number, and there wasn't one. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're to make sure that the inputs and the outputs, or the inputs in the box and the get inputs here match the number. You could have less. You could only be looking for 1 here and have 2 or 3 over here, but you can't have it. You can't have 3 of these and only 2 of these. All right, let's move on then. We're going to talk a little bit about so Coral, and I would say most languages have a bunch of built-in functions that do some kinds of math functions, so that you don't have to know how to, calculate square root or exponents or some things like that. So we're going to do one here. These are all going to be floats. Float A, float B, float C. I'm going to have a float results, and then result. And then we're going to have A equals get next input, B equals get next input, C equals. And then over here, we'll use something like 5.0. These are floats. 2.0, 1.5, something like that. What we're going to do is, we're going to use, so there's a bunch of these, and you can look at them you can look at them on the ebook, but there's one of them that's called this raise to power. So to keep our sequencing going, up here, I'm going to say, what are we trying to accomplish? We want to do this. We want to raise. We want to calculate the exponent of A to the B power, where B is to the C power. So it's a little complicated, but I think we'll be able to figure it out. All right, so if I was to just write the pseudocode for this, we obviously need to declare our variables and load from input. And then we need to perform calculation. And then we want to show results. Okay. So we got the first part here. The way that this function works is this. So num1 num2. It looks like this. So we're going to say result equals raised to the power a, comma, just like this. But in this case, so for b is actually then b to the c power. So one thing that you probably learned way back in mathematics in grade school was something we call the order of operations. And the order of operations in math means certain things get calculated before other things. And so on the computer, there's an order of operations that especially applies to functions like this math function, where it's going to calculate the innermost function first, and then take the result and put it where the function is, and then it will go out and it will calculate the next part of the next function or the next thing that's in the equation. So I say that because we can put the next function inside of this function and have it like this. So what this does is it calculates this using the numbers that are provided here. It calculates this one, and it takes the calculation and then it just drops it right here. And then it calculates this one with whatever the value of a is and whatever the result of the calculation of this is. I hope that makes sense. And then we're going to put result to output. And Corel has this thing where we can just specify the decimal points, because if we run it, let's just run it as is right here, and let's see what we get first. So we get this number, great, but it's a giant long number. In Corel, we can say with 2 decimal places. So if I run it again, now it's not showing that giant number, it's just rounded it to 2 decimal places. All right, I hope that helps to how you can use variables and how you can use math functions with variables. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is using if statements or using branching. So let's say that I want to print. Let's say I want to determine what school a kid goes to, and then I'm gonna say and results. If the kid is between 7 and, I don't know, I'm just making this up, 12, then they go to elementary. If the kid is between 13 and 18, they go to high school. We're just keeping it simple. Okay, that's what our requirements are. Now let's think about how we would approach it. Okay, so we need to declare variable for age, for kids' age. And we need to, let's say, put that on here, and fill from input. Got to spell declare right too, huh? And then the next thing we need to do is determine what school kid goes to and print it out. Now I'm kind of just putting it all together in one. You might have this as several steps. All right. So we're going to have age, and then we're going to have let's say the person is 10. We'll start with 10. Age equals get next input. So we've gathered the input. Now we've got to make a decision about whether the kid is in elementary school or high school. Okay? Now there's this construct in every language that's called an if else. And so what that does is it would say something like, if age is less than, let's say, 13, then we do something. Put to output. And then if it's not this, so you could just do this, and then it would either print elementary school if the age was greater than 13, less than 13, or it would just do nothing. What instead, if we also then said else, put high school. So in this example, I'm not saying this solves our problem, by the way. In this example, you either get elementary school or high school. There's only one, what we call this a logical expression or a conditional expression. There's only one of these, and it calculates or resolves to be either true or false. If it's true, then it does this one. Else, meaning if it's false, it does this one. So we need something that's a little bit more. So for right now, let's just run this thing and see what happens. I've got 10. So if I run it, so it prints elementary school. And if I was to come back and make this 13, then it prints high school, okay? So for ours, we need to be a little more sophisticated. And so we can say, so if the age is, we're going to say if the age is greater than 6 and the age is less than 13, then we're doing elementary school. Okay, so that would give us a range here. We could always say instead of that, if that doesn't make any sense to you, we could say greater than or equal to 7 or less than and equal to, 12. That matches our numbers here. So in this case, it's going to print this number. But anything outside of this range, if we were to just leave the program like this, it would print high school. Okay, so that means that if I was to make this say a 6, and I was to run it with it as is, it's going to say high school because this would be false, and so then it just does this. So there's another thing that we can do with Coral, and that's we can use what's called an else if. So what else if does is it says, okay, if it's false, if the first if is false, then I'm going to ask another question, or I'm going to provide another equation expression. So in this case, I would say if age is greater than or equal to 13 and age is less than or equal to 18, then we do high school. Now, the only thing we need to account for now is, well, what if they're not in they're not in the range of elementary school or in the range of high school? So that's where the if comes in here. And we'll just say, not in school. Okay, so let's see what happens here. Okay, we got 6 right here. Let's just run it with 6 because that really should, so this one should be false, and then this one should be false, and it should come down and it should show us this one. All right, let's go through a few more of these. So let's say the person is 7. So then this one is true, and then of course it doesn't even have to do any of the other ones because it's true. All right, what if we say 15? Okay, that should fall into the high school. So you can keep going over and over again here. You can make these if statements pretty complex, but you have to be a little bit careful because they can get so complex that it's hard to understand. One other thing that I want to show you, you know when we were looking at variables earlier, we did something like this, age equals 10. So the equal sign here is what we call an assignment it's an assignment expression. So what it's doing is it's taking age and it's assigning it a value of 10. There's another one that's a little bit different, and it's two equal signs. Don't confuse them, because two equal signs is an equality measure. So it would be like this: if age equals 7. So that means this is equal to this. And the result of this isn't assigning 7 to age. It would be false if it's 15, right? It would result in a true or a false. So I just want to point that out because sometimes that can trip up students. All right, well, we have covered quite a bit for this video. So I think for now, we'll wrap this one up, and I'll have another video shortly that goes through and talks about some of the labs. Now, I don't ever focus directly on the lab itself, but I will focus on some of the principles that are covered in the labs and how you might tackle some of those. So